This is not your daddy's animated Star Trek.
You almost phasered me!
Calm down. It's such a it was such a stun.
Hi, I'm Phil. Welcome to the channel where I talk about all the geeky pop culture that I consume and enjoy. Things like Doctor Who, various superhero things, and of course, Star Trek. And we have a brand new Star Trek show that started in the US yesterday and is unfortunately only available in Canada and the US, technically. There are ways. I'll leave you to find them. But it is a bit of a shame. Lower Decks is what it's called. And so, as I have done recently with both the new Star Trek series of Discovery and Picard, I'm going to do weekly reviews of these, which is good because it's motivation to actually get making videos again. I've had about a month off making videos, so a little bit of motivation. I've had a baby. Not me personally. I mean, my wife had it. I don't have the equipment. But my wife has had a baby. We've got a newborn in the house, and it's just slightly taken off my time from making videos. But this new series of Star Trek is motivation to get back on the weekly grind of making those videos. So, weekly Lower Decks reviews here on the channel for you guys. Now, if you haven't seen Lower Decks yet because you are in a country that you cannot get it, or you don't have access to CBS All Access if you are in the US, but you still want to find out what people think about it, this is a safe space for you for the first 5 minutes or so. I will give you a warning when I'm going to get into spoilers, but I'm going to give my overall thoughts of what the episode was and what I think of it and what I think of the series so far at the top of this video, and then I will go on to talk about spoilers, but I will give ample warning before I do. So this is a safe space if you have not seen the episode for the first 5 minutes, and then I will give you a warning when to leave. So the first episode is called Second Contact, which is the entire sort of premise of the show. This is a set on a ship that goes to planets that have already had first contact with the Federation, and they are the second Federation presence that this planet will have encountered, and they're there to sort of set up the infrastructure, install things like universal communicator type things so that they can communicate better, just generally set up things that are going to help with trade and communication and diplomacy between the Federation and this planet. So that's the basic premise of the show, and it's the title of this episode. So we get, I think, from the episode title itself, and the fact that we know that is the premise of the show, we get a strong sense that this is very much a setting up the premise type episode, and it, like a good first episode needs to do. I do think it strikes quite a good balance between setting up all the characters and all of the sort of things, the plot threads that are going to carry on throughout. Maybe there's some little hints at things that are quite nice. It strikes a nice balance between doing that work which we need. We definitely get a good feel for all of the, I'd say, the four main characters which we're going to be following throughout this series. There are obviously other recurring characters, but I think the four main ones, we get a really, well, three of them at least, we get a really good sense of them. And then also telling a story itself within the episode. So I think it does a good job of balancing those two aspects. I think a lot of people didn't really know what to expect going into this series, because I think the clip that got released in advance, which was the opening scene of the episode, gives a very, it's heavy on the comedy and heavy on the fast-paced, lines, line, here, witty reply. And I think what that gave the impression of was that was going to be the whole series. And don't get me wrong, it is there throughout the episode. It's not just in that scene, but there is more to the series than that. It does feel like a series that is going to give us some good character stuff, that is going to give us developing characters, that is going to give us some... It still kind of feels like it's Star Trek, but maybe an exaggerated Star Trek. The comedy is there, it runs throughout, and it's, I think a lot of people worried about that too. I was never worried about the comedy in it. I thought comedy could absolutely work in it. We've had a lot of very darker Star Trek series in recent years, with Discovery and Picard both being very much more serious they've had elements of comedy. You had the occasional comedy episodes. You had the Harry Mudd episodes, which were quite comedic in the first season of Discovery. But overall, their sort of tone was a lot darker, and they suffered a lot of criticism for that. Now, I quite like a darker tone, but I also like a lighter tone. I like a mix, and what I think Star Trek is doing really well at the moment is creating a variety of new shows. This is the most Star Trek shows we've ever had in production at one time. We've got 5 if you include the Nickelodeon animated series, which is also coming. 5 Star Trek series in production at one time. Back in the 90s when we had just 2, that seemed a lot to have 2 Star Trek shows on air at one time. But now we've got 5 of them, and I think they've got a unique opportunity to do different things with each one. You're going to have your darker stuff in Picard and Discovery, and even those, they're told in very different ways. And then you've got your kind of more traditional Star Trek, I think we're going to get in Strange New Worlds. And then you've got this opportunity to do this comedy in this series, and this kind of much more lighter take, and much more sort of irreverent take on the franchise, that still manages to honour it, and yet be slightly different, something we haven't seen before. And I think there's absolutely a place to have all these different things. And you may not like all of the series. Some things you may be somebody who comedy really doesn't appeal to you, and that's fine. You can miss out a series. They're not so interconnected that if you miss one out, that you're going to lose out massively. If it's not your thing, that's absolutely fine. But as a fan of some of the adult animation comedy series that we've had in the past, I've never seen Rick and Morty, incidentally. I've only ever seen clips of it. The thing that puts me off of Rick and Morty is the fact that Morty is always drawn with that dribble, and I can't. It's put me off watching it. But anyway, that's beside the point. The point is that, what is the point? What am I talking about? Oh yes, there's space for lots of different things in this Star Trek universe, and I think the comedy is absolutely one of the places where we can, and it doesn't stray too far that it feels like most of the time. I'll come to a few minor criticisms I have in a minute, but most of the time it straddles that line quite well. I think the comedy, I actually mostly enjoyed it. I laughed out loud. There were several, particularly it was the way the lines were read, the line readings by the actors in certain circumstances, and from our main characters, and even some of the auxiliary characters, the bridge crew, which in any other Star Trek show would be the main characters. Here they are the secondary characters, and some of them have some great line readings. The second in command has some brilliant moments, and there were several instances where I laughed out loud, which I don't always do during comedies. Even when I'm finding it funny, to make me laugh out loud, it has to surprise me and make me funny, surprise me and be funny, and this does that quite well. Now, obviously, as the title of the show indicates, the premise isn't just about going to worlds for the second time and making second contact. It's also called Lower Decks. It's about the people that you don't usually get to focus on in Star Trek. The people that do the grunt work, the people that clean, do the maintenance on the replicators, the people that clean the holodecks. It's the sort of grunt work level things, not the officers, the people that you don't really see much of unless there's an episode like Star Trek The Next Generation's Lower Decks episode where they focus on them. And so that was a really interesting thing to see, and the dynamics between the characters, we'll come to this a bit more in the spoiler section, because there are the dynamics between these ensigns and the officers. There is some stuff there that I think has a lot of potential, especially between 2 particular characters, which again I'll talk about in the spoiler section, but I think they're setting up some nice character arc stuff going forward with that, and between each other as well. And it's just nice to see that sort of contrast of how the lower decks deal with a situation as opposed to the higher ups. And we get a situation in this episode which is a typical Star Trek episode plot that is going on, but it's kind of in the background. And we get to see how our characters react to it when they are thrown into it, but it initially starts with something going on in the background because it's a bridge crew thing, it's an officer thing that, you know, as you would get in any TNG episode. So it's nice to see how they react to that and the dynamics of that. The one instance, I think, where it didn't quite work for me and the comedy slightly overstepped the scenario and made it feel like, okay, because most of the time the comedy doesn't interrupt what you would think would happen in a Star Trek series. You've just got some people that make some witty banter in between things happening, or some observations, some very meta observations, but most of the time it doesn't interrupt and it doesn't throw you out of it, and you don't think, why is this happening now? Why this doesn't make sense in the world? There was one instance, and it's right when the plot of what's going on the ship in this kicks off, that I kind of thought, okay, that doesn't quite track in terms of how these two characters are reacting. I will get to that more in the spoiler section. But overall, to sum up my thoughts, I thought it was a good start. My other one criticism is that I think the pace of it sometimes is a little bit too erratic. It's certainly there in the first scene, and I kind of dismissed that because the character in question is drunk in that scene, and so I won't class this as spoilers because it's the scene that got released widely, but Beckett is drunk in that very first scene, having drunk some Romulan whiskey, and it's constant. It's line after line after line, and you don't really have any time to settle on it. And I kind of dismiss that as being part of the drunkenness of the character in that scene. But that character kind of is like that throughout, and other characters as well, kind of to a lesser degree, are a little bit like that. And it feels like there's never enough time for anything to kind of land. As soon there's another witty remark coming in, and it's just line really quickly, and sometimes that works in the episode, and sometimes it just feels like the pace is just going far too quickly, and that is the style of this show. I gather that's the style of things like Rick and Morty as well, which one of the writers on Rick and Morty now works on this show. It's just, I think maybe that needs to be toned down just a tiny bit, because in places it just didn't give enough space for the scene to sort of land. It was too quick. It was on to the next one already. It was on to the next witty remark already. So there was a little bit of that which felt like it was just getting in the way a little bit. But overall, I had a very good time watching this episode. I'm excited to watch more. I had a good time. I was laughing out loud. I had a good time. And really, what more do you want out of a show? Especially a comedy show. So that's my non-spoiler thoughts. I will do a quick spoiler section now for where we can talk about actual plot things. So if you've not seen the episode, maybe you want to leave now, or maybe you don't care about spoilers. I don't know. But from now on, spoiler warning, there will be spoilers. So the thing I was talking about earlier with the two characters that kind of felt a bit off in how they reacted when the plot kicked in on the ship. The plot being that there's some kind of zombie virus type thing that turns people into a sort of rage machines and start trying to eat people. All of that was very good, but it kicks off in the background of two characters having a date, and it's one of the characters which I felt was which was one of our main characters, the cyborg guy, who I felt got a little bit less development than the other ones. And it was fine. I liked the fact that it was kicking off in the background to start with, because it epitomizes the show. You know, you've got your focus is on these ensigns, and in the background you've got the second in command at the bar, and something's happening to him because he got bit on the planet by a mosquito or some kind of the thing. And I like the fact that it was happening in the background. But then once everybody realizes and there's a big fight on and everyone else is firing at him and trying to stun him and stuff, and they've ducked behind a table, they sort of just carry on their conversation as if it wasn't going on. And that was the one time in the episode where the comedy of it kind of felt like it didn't quite sit right, because, their colleagues are dying or getting attacked, getting eaten by their other colleagues around them, and they're, chatting and continuing their date. It just didn't quite ring true in that one moment, and I hope we don't get too many moments like that, because most of the time, as I said, the comedy was integrated into the world of Star Trek really well, and it just kind of felt like just got some really witty people, and there were some meta moments and things. There was one meta moment which I thought didn't work as well, and that's right at the end when Beckett is listing off a load of famous Star Trek names that we know as the audience, obviously, because they're the main characters in the shows we watch. Now, some of them I can imagine it fits for them to come up. She's showing off a little bit. She's talking about how, you've heard of Kirk. And yeah, okay, Kirk is really famous. Spock as well, fine. Then they get to Sulu, and I'm like, okay, he was a, well-respected captain in his time, and he was a member of that original Enterprise crew, which is a quite famous crew. And then they start getting into the TNG characters, and you get to, like, Diana Troy and Worf, and I just start thinking, this is obviously for us. This is the meta moments to reference characters to go, oh, this does belong in the same universe. It just felt really weird that she would list so many characters that we happen to have. If it had done Kirk and Spock, that would have been fine. Maybe Sulu would have pushed. I don't know. Diana Troy, really? Is she that famous within the ranks of Starfleet? I don't know. But on the whole, those were the only two moments that really felt to me like they stood out as something that jarred and didn't quite work. The rest of the episode I really enjoyed, and we had, obviously, some of them it kind of split in. You had the stuff going on the ship and the stuff going down on the planet, where Beckett is Beckett being the kind of character that obviously has disregard for the official protocols, paired up with a guy who is completely by the book and has been asked to spy on her by the captain. And you get that creates quite an interesting dynamic up top. We get a nice story arc within this episode of him coming to sort of like from where he absolutely would have reported her at the beginning to the end, where he is standing up and going for her and going, no, I didn't see her do anything that contravenes rules and regulations, when he absolutely did. And I think we get a nice journey for him in this episode particularly, but I think it's going to be a journey that continues. He's going to continue learning from her and her way of thinking as the series progresses. She's probably going to learn a little bit from him as well. So there's a nice character dynamic there. The twist at the end that we find out is that Beckett, is in fact the captain's daughter, which you wouldn't have guessed from the rest of the... Well, I mean, I think some people did guess, but I didn't guess from the rest of the episode. And it was interesting. I mean, it makes sense because, the way she speaks to her, any other ensign probably would have been heavily disciplined, and she's just kind of like frustrated. The captain's just frustrated that she's undermining her the whole time. But any other ensign would have been like disciplined from that. But I think it's another thing that they're setting up, and they're setting up quite a few different things in this that are going to play out throughout the season, and we're going to get some nice character stuff, some nice character arcs, some mysteries as well that they kind of set up. Why did she get demoted from her last? 'Cause she was at how she knows that she helped. I missed a bit where I was talking about. I was going to talk about her helping the farmers down on the planet by giving them supplies that she wasn't meant to. How she knew that they needed help was that she was on the first contact mission on a first contact ship, but she got demoted and then reassigned to this ship. So what happened there? Why did she get demoted? That's all stuff that we've got to find out in future episodes, and hopefully they will address it at some point, but it'd be nice to sort of tease it out a little bit and sort of gradually find out about that. So there's some really good sort of story arc potential in this for the character story arc stuff in this series. Some really nice stuff from the dynamics between the characters. And yeah, and it's funny. It is funny. I enjoyed it a lot. And that's kind of all I've really got to say about it. Anybody that's a bit worried about the comedy, I would say, yes, look, this is overly heightened reality, effectively. You know, no real... I mean, in some of the clips we've seen, we've got one of the bridge officers, you know, comes forth and, like, strips, like, I think his chest bursts out of his... Something like that happens in one of the clips that we've seen in the trailer. And yeah, that wouldn't happen in a live action one. That's very much a comedy series animation trope. But just think of it as a heightened reality. It's still canon, it's still something that took place in the Star Trek universe. But I mean, my headcanon is slightly that it's like somebody's retelling it and doing and slightly exaggerating things. So everything we see happened, but it's slightly exaggerated. And if you think about it like that, I think it's a lot easier to deal with if you're someone that's worried about how it fits into the wider Star Trek universe. But look, that's just my thoughts. What did you think of it? Did you like this? If you've seen it, are you looking forward to it? If you haven't seen it, what are your thoughts on the comedy? What are your thoughts on the characters? I've realised I've missed out talking about the new character who arrives. They're all new characters to us, obviously, but somebody new arrives on the ship, and that's the other of the main four. You've got the cyborg, you've got Beckett, you got I'm probably messed up all their names. The other guy, I've forgotten all their names already. If you watch my Star Trek Picard reviews, you'll know it takes me a while, a good half a season, to remember anybody's names. What did you think of them all? Let me know in the comments below. And yeah, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, do all that jazz, because it really helps out. Hit that bell button, all that sort of stuff if you enjoyed this. And I will be back next week for more reviews of Star Trek Lower Decks. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.